Welcome to Dungeon Academics. My name is Thomas and I will be your instructor. In this video, I'd like to talk about wizards and sorcerers and what I would do with them if I was in charge of making the next edition of Dungeons and Dragons. Fingers crossed. Okay, so what is the current problem with wizards and sorcerers? We have two arcane casters, and I feel that while both classes can be great fun to play in 5th edition and 5.5 or 524, whatever you want to call it, I believe there is a somewhat disconnect between the background and the gameplay, and I think there are certainly areas potentially for improvement. There was an old computer game made in the early 2000s that never got published. It was going to be called Warhammer Online, and it got cancelled, and another game called Warhammer Age of Reckoning came out. Warhammer Online was supposed to be the Warhammer response to World of Warcraft, and it looked great, but apparently the development just collapsed. I don't know the full story there, but there was an interview with one of the game developers, and he said something that I really like. He said, sometimes you have to fudge the lore to improve the gameplay, and sometimes you have to fudge the gameplay to fit the lore. But whatever you do, make tasty fudge. And I think this is a good philosophy to take. Sometimes you have to bend the background to make rule mechanics a bit more interesting, and sometimes you might have to sacrifice rule mechanics to fit the story. But whatever you do, make sure it's fun. And I think there's been a bit of that going on with the sorcerer, but I think it could be improved. The sorcerer is a charisma-based caster with meta magic in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. And there's something that doesn't quite sit well with me for both of those. The innate nature of a sorcerer's power comes from their bloodline, their heritage, whether there's a touch of being too close to a dragon or some powerful demon or some other magically induced creature that has woven this magic into their bloodline, and it manifests itself as their arcane abilities. How does that really come across as a charisma-based caster? For me, that screams constitution-based caster. That they are drawing upon their own body, the power innate within them to cast. That sounds like a perfect Constitution caster. Now you might say, well, that should make Constitution their dump stat, and let's be fair, if you're a caster, Constitution is probably going to be your second highest stat after your primary one. So I don't think there's that much of a sacrifice making them Constitution casters. Keep their damage die quite low as a D6. They'll end up with a fair few hit points from having a higher Constitution modifier. But I think that's certainly more fitting with the flavour. As for the current meta magic rules, the idea of tweaking spells, that really sounds more like a wizard to me. A wizard is someone who spends their time studying spells in a book, perhaps adjusting the rules as they go along. That meta magic tweaking, subtle spell, range spell, twin spell, I think that should be more a wizard's domain. So what would I make special for sorcerers instead? Because sorcerers should be special, they should be different. And I was thinking about this, why not give sorcerers a deck of abilities that come from using their own innate connection to magic, their natural magic birthright? You could have this set of cards. See, cards, I'm turning this into a product already, though it could just be a list of abilities that you generate randomly and pick one from. And they give you abilities. You draw one card a turn, it tells you what you can do. And maybe at higher levels, you draw multiple cards and pick one, but you can only cast one per turn. And they do things like heal you when you cast magic. So you get an amount of healing based on the power of the spell. Or alternatively, you sacrifice hit dice to lower the spell slot requirement of the spell you want to cast. So say you really want to cast that fireball, but you've only got a level 1 spell slot left. Well, sacrificing 4 hit dice to give 2 extra power levels for a spell slot, that's great. Imagine you're sacrificing your own vitality to power spells, with the potential that you might get some of it back as you continue casting. I know a Wild Magic Sorcerer is an incredibly popular class, and what this does is this takes some of the Wild Magic randomness and puts it straight into the core Sorcerer class. Now that chaotic table of randomness, that can be incorporated into a subclass for Wild Magic, but this ability to sacrifice your own vitality to empower your spells, or potentially gain some back as the magic flows through you, that could be a great core mechanic for sorcerers. That's what sorcerers do. And as you get more powerful, you gain the ability to hold a couple of extra of these cards in your hand. So you have some in your deck and some in your hand, and you can choose which one you're going to cast. You might get the ability to put a already used card back in the deck, shuffle it, hoping that you'll get it back at some point. And as you level up, you can add more cards to the deck, and they're going to be potentially of higher level or more potency. So as you get back, the randomness grows in power with you. I think that could be a really interesting way to do a sorcerer. And it makes it very different from a wizard. What about wizards? Well, wizards, like I said, they're book nerds. They spend their life studying magic. And what I'd like to see is a set of signature spells for a wizard. There's all the spells the wizard knows, but there's a few that they've been tinkering with, experimenting with. And what you can do is you can use your scholarly logic to adjust spells. Maybe very powerful wizards can adjust the spell slot requirement, but at other levels you could adjust the range or damage type or blast radius or the amount of damage done. And every time you level up, you get to tinker with these spells a little, your signature spells a bit, and change subtly what they do. But what I'd really like to see for wizards is something that encourages them to cast different spells every turn. Imagine sort of like a bingo grid where you've got different damage types and different schools of magic arranged in a bingo grid. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to make a line that goes horizontally, vertically, or diagonally across the bingo grid. And when you do so, you get some sort of bonus to empower your spells or get more spell slots back or something like that. So you could be going, oh man, what I really want to do is I want to cast an illusion magic that does fire damage, or if I've got a spell that's a transmutation that does some healing effect, then this this effect will happen that empowers my future spells. And what this is doing is it's encouraging the wizard to cast different spells and have a large diversity of spells in their spell book. I've talked a lot about encouraging martial characters to do different things. The idea of making combos using different weapon mastery features. And as they power up their combos, their attacks start doing more damage. Imagine something similar for a wizard, where they are encouraged to use as many different schools of magic and as many different damage types, because when they complete a row on their bingo card, they get a spell slot back, or a higher level spell slot that they might not normally have access to. That could be a really good way to encourage diversity of action. And as with the fighter, it means that potentially they're getting more powerful as the fight goes on. One issue that I have with Dungeons and Dragons is you're always most powerful at the start, whether it's at the start of the day or the start of the combat, and then as you use your resources, you become less powerful. This combo mechanic for fighters and this bingo mechanic for wizards means that as the combat goes on, potentially they get more powerful, and that massively changes the balance of the game. So you're in most peril at the start of the fight, and you're just trying to survive and build up these combos or build up this magical bingo card. And then when that starts kicking in, you start getting more powerful. You have more dangerous spells, more powerful melee attacks. I think that really would be an interesting way to play the game. Rather than trying to go Nova at the start of every combat and wipe everything out. At the start of the combat, you're trying to survive and build up your powers. I think this subtle change in playstyle could be really, really good fun. But anyway, that's how I would change Sorcerer and Wizard. They are now radically different arcane casters with different abilities, different unique tinkering things to change the way they cast magic. I think they could be great fun to play. But anyway, that's what I'd do if I was in charge of 6th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. And enjoy your next game, whatever it may be.